Hey everybody, what's going on? Mark here. So this week's episode we pulled from our Patreon archives over at patreon.com/Cryptonaut podcast. This is the first of a two-parter, so you're getting the part one this week. You're going to get part two next week of a conversation that we had with our buddy, Mr. Nikolaus Cox. We've had Nikolaus on the show before. He's such a great dude. He always brings great stories. And we thought this was a perfect time to put the episode out to the masses. So be sure to check the description of this podcast for all of Nick's links. And he will be releasing his own show soon, the Mystorians podcast. So be on the lookout for that when that launches. We are super excited to see what he's going to be doing with that show. It sounds awesome. And we hope you all enjoyed this episode. But before I get out of here, I want to let everybody know that we recently launched a new design over at hellorspace.com. Goblins are real. Oh, shit, this is so dope. Todd Purse designed this for us. He is an amazing artist, super talented. Be sure to check his work out at createmagicstudios.com. He has such an awesome style. And he absolutely killed this design, knocked it out of the park. It's up there. It's for sale. It's been out there for about a week or so, and people have been loving it. So, again, be sure to check that out, hellorspace.com. Get yourself some T-shirts, some pillows, some mugs, some pins, some long sleeves, some short sleeves, some mid sleeves, some baseball tees, hoodies, whatever you want to get this design on. We got it. Check it out. There it is. Thank you all so very much. Without further ado, Christopher Q. That creepy music. Hello and welcome to the Cryptonaut Podcast, Patreon edition. I am Mark Storrs, and with me as always is
Rob Morphy.
And for this Patreon episode, we have a very special returning guest, Mr. Nikolaus Cox. Thank you so much for joining us, good sir.
Hello, it is an absolute pleasure to be back on the show.
Now,
it's great to have you, man.
Of you
it's
guys,
awesome.
Every one of you guys are going to remember Nick. Of course, he's our Cambridge archaeologist by way of New Zealand, world traveler, former gonzo journalist we've discovered, jungle explorer, basically all around fucking Indiana Jones with the sweetest voice this size. Oh, I'm sorry, that side of the Atlantic. I misspoke. and a good friend to the podcast now and our listeners. It's become a dear favorite. So welcome back, Nick. And it's awesome to be able to pick your brain yet again about another topic in the annals of the unknown.
Yeah, totally.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. In the field of the Fortean. Honestly, it is such a pleasure to be back, if not just because Rob gives me such a glowing review when I come onto the show. I might want to make that into my ringtone. Thank you so much.
Every time I find out something new about Nick, I'm just like, the fuck he did, really? So, he's my spirit animal, and this is what I aspire to be when I grow up. And it's fucking awesome. I love every bit of it.
It's kind of funny because, with the last episode that we had Nick on, it had such a great, reception to it. People loved it.
How could they not?
It was great. It was on Patreon. Then we put it out to the public, and it was such an awesome reception. I'm like, man, I hope we do not ruin his career.
No, if anything, I really my career has boomed.
Good. That is awesome to hear.
I mean, to be honest, the last time I spoke to you, I was in quarantine and not working, and I'm still in quarantine and not working. So that's kind of facetious. But as far as a career is being followed on Instagram, my career has boomed because the fans of this show are the sweetest and kindest people, and I've received so much praise and social media followers, and that's currency in and of itself. So
that's true.
I gotta say,
and our listeners are the shit, and I mean that in the most
absolutely
way
fucking are.
That fecal matter so can be. They are the best of the fucking best. But yes, Nick, it's great to have you back.
Oh, it's so good to be back. I've been craving this because I need something. Oh my God! Quarantine's driving me nuts.
We're all filling the void. That is humanity's condition now. No matter what it is you're doing, Make it positive, and this is something that I'm really looking forward to, because unlike the first time we talked to you, which was the gorillas of Guadalcanal, which was a fascinating study about those really mysterious islands in the deep Pacific, the Solomon Islands, and the other sundry little places where the Japanese were encamped, and the Yeti-like or hairy hominid type creatures. We had a really fun discussion that was intensely cryptozoological. But now you're going to take us on a journey to where you were a journalist in South America and Bolivia, to be specific, and some experiences you had there that are going to delve more into the mystical, the occult, the supernatural in general. And that's something, as Mark and I have discussed a lot, and I even discussed with you, Nick, is not a place we go very often at all. So I'm fascinated to explore what is essentially the flip side of Fortean studies, which, I mean, it's not to say they're not both valid, but obviously there's a yin and a yang there. And so I'm super stoked to go into this with you now and Mark.
I agree entirely. I feel like cryptozoology does get more sort of credence from the general public, because it is something that, cryptozoology in and of itself is seeking to find a scientifically rational explanation for the unexplained, whereas the supernatural is something that we accept as inherently inexplicable with our current level of understanding, or our current level of science, rather. And for that very reason, it often is met with more skepticism, because it's something that is innately impossible to prove. And I do have theories on what we're going to be discussing soon. I do have ideas. But no, the supernatural is, it's the other side of the Fortean world. And it's slightly scarier, I'd say, due to the nature of it being inexplicable, but just as exciting to discuss. So I'm thrilled to get into it.
I agree with
no
that.
Doubt. Totally.
It is definitely more frightening. I can speak to that on a personal level, but I think I can speak to it even on an objective level, in that certainly a monstrously muscular and feral animal can end your life. And that is, like, I suppose, for many, the ultimate terror. But really, when you go beyond that, because I'd say most of the, I don't know, I have no way of guessing this, but I know there's a lot of people that subscribe to theology and a lot of other people that have spiritual notions. The idea of what the supernatural world can do when it's at its most nefarious is something that goes beyond just ending the mortal coil. It can just corrupt the eternal. And I think that, and along with many other reasons, that it's more nebulous, it's more mysterious, it can be more insidious and not just an animal that's either hungry or territorial. I think the supernatural world definitely harbors a lot more hidden and not so hidden terrors than the cryptozoological or even the ufological world does.
I think you're absolutely right.
Does this harken back to Rob, to your comment of I don't technically believe in demons?
That's 100% accurate.
Okay, yeah, and of course, never take the devil off the table.
I can't do the math and make demons come out. In my own life, if someone says, if you touch this crystal skull and say Bloody Mary backwards 3 times and spin on your left foot, you're fucked. You're fucked for life and everything's done. There's a good chance that even though I 100% know in my logical mind it won't, I'm not going to fucking take that chance. Because what if it's some weird quantum entanglement thing or some other fucking facet of science that we don't know yet that will fuck me in the long run? I'm just going to trust you when you tell me not to do it. No.
Yeah.
It's
living
higher
smart,
science.
I guess.
It's higher science. Everything is science, whether we can explain it as with our current level of technology or not. And that is my theory for everything. Yeah. And
to that end, let me jump into by reading a portion of this paper you sent us. It's a paper that we will be putting up somewhere in its PDF form that is excellent. It is beautifully written. Anyone that read Nick's last piece will know that he's an excellent writer. But this is from his time as a journalist in Bolivia, and it's fascinating. But this really struck a chord with me, and it's along the same lines of what we were talking. And I'm going to give Nick mad credit for putting into words something that has been toying around in the back of my head for forever. And so this is a quote from this piece. In the developed world, we have a habit of splitting things up into the prosaic, the explained, and the esoteric, the unexplained. What science cannot describe becomes supernatural and is perceived by many to be lesser for it. There is the assumption that science is the be-all and end-all of making sense of one's world, and anything beyond scientific explanation is fiction and fallacy. This, I believe, I believe, the epitome of arrogance. Every civilization in our planet's history has declared that they know everything and have ordered the world perfectly so it makes sense, and anything that challenges this order, the preternatural, is unreliable and laughable in its wrongness. But humans as a species have proved time and time again that we always learn more than we thought we could know. And old explanations become archaic in the face of new ones. Kudos for that, man. I'm clapping a one-man applause here because fucking wow.
Yeah,
well
that's awesome.
said. That's
Hearing
absolutely
that
fucking true.
Hearing that in your voice gave me goosebumps. I'm like, oh my God. I didn't write that. Rob made that. That was incredible.
No, it's astonishing, and I could not possibly agree more with that statement, as well as your other statement that we're dealing with a higher science. But understanding that going in, let's take us to Bolivia, and
right.
Here we have this post-conquistador confluence of Roman Catholicism and traditional Incan and other ancient societies' beliefs crashing together, and you go there as a young journalist, and you're just kind of thrown in. Can you paint a little picture for us about what that was like and what the not necessarily theological but like belief culture is in that society?
So coming to Bolivia to work in journalism was kind of done because I was looking for things to do, and I hadn't really thought it through at all. But arriving in Bolivia, it was this introduction to this culture I arrived knowing nothing about. I could speak Spanish, and that was the limit of it. I just thought I would do volunteer work, or paid work rather, in South America. And I showed up in Bolivia, and what I learned in Bolivia was that Bolivia is a really fascinating and very unique South American country. And it's something that you don't realize on an international level, but when you live there, it's unavoidable. So Bolivia is one of the most isolated South American countries. To the west of it, it has the Andes that separate from Peru and Chile. To the north and to the east, it's got the Amazon rainforest, which separates it from Uruguay, Paraguay, and Brazil. And to the south, it's got pampas grass, the Gran Chaco Desert, and the salt flats. So it's got all these geographical barriers that keep this very rich, sort of agriculturally rich sort of enclave cut off from the rest of South America.
Which also, I assume, prevented it from being infiltrated as deeply by the conquistadors.
Exactly. Well, that's what I'm leading to. Like, not only is it sort of this microcosm ecologically, it was just very difficult to get to for outsiders because of these physical barriers. And for that reason, while it was conquered by the Spaniards, like the rest of South America was, the conquistadors never moved into Bolivia in the numbers they did in other South American countries that open up to the coast or have more easily passable terrain. And for this reason, Bolivia has the largest indigenous population, extant indigenous population in South America, because they didn't suffer all the various diseases as well as the genocide that was encountered in numerous other countries upon first contact with Europeans, the Portuguese and Spaniards, etc. And for this reason, to this day, Bolivia maintains a very powerful and influential indigenous presence, which is often not observed in other countries. Even in their capital cities, indigenous mentalities and indigenous people sort of hold sway, to the point where their recently ousted president, Evo Morales, was the first president in South American history, that's the continent, to be elected as an indigenous man.
That's kind of hard to believe. I mean, I know it's true, but it's honestly, like the fuck.
It is shocking to consider that. So Evo Morales, I was there during his presidency. So and he was renowned for actually really trying to lift up the voices of indigenous populations. He himself was Aymara, who are an indigenous group that live on the Altiplano, which is sort of a steppe region coming off the Andes. But of course, you've got Quechua, you've got numerous different ethnic groups, the Tucana, who we'll get to in a moment, living across Bolivia. And the fascinating thing about Bolivia is the fact that the Spanish influence, which is sort of like militant Catholicism, if you can imagine it at the time of the conquest, really only took root in the larger cities like Cochabamba, Sucre, or La Paz. So if you're in these cities, everyone's Catholic. It also has the largest proportion of Spanish-descended Bolivians. But the moment you start to leave these large settled areas, you're immediately confronted with pervasive indigenous beliefs and traditions that have existed since pre-Columbian times. That's pre-Christopher Columbus. And even in La Paz, in sort of neighborhoods towards so La Paz is like the largest city in Bolivia. And if you go towards the peripheries of La Paz, you start to encounter signs that Catholicism isn't the same kind of Catholicism you will encounter in Europe. And I mentioned in my article, one particular place that really stuck out in my mind was in El Alto, which is sort of like a pseudo-city attached to the edge of La Paz, a larger shanty town kind of city, where a lot of people
where immigrants would come in to populate and sort of build a makeshift hamlet of a larger suburb of a larger city.
It's only really happened in the last sort of 2 decades. La Paz was traditionally in this valley, but as La Paz became the sort of commercial capital, a lot of people moved in from the country to settle La Paz, and they built this big shanty city, which is the same size as La Paz, and it's technically part of it, but it's very different along the cliff edge, and this is called El Alto, which literally means the high, because it's built on high.
So is that a separate city?
In many ways, yes. So La Paz has historically been built into the valley. That was where the original colonial settlement was. And in the last 20 years, they've built this extra city on the cliff overlooking the city. It's literally on high. It is a higher up shanty city that looks down into La Paz. And it is, while La Paz has a great deal of Spanish-descended people living inside of it, El Alto has a great deal of indigenous people who have come from around the country to seek employment in the commercial capital that is La Paz. And as they have come, so to have their faiths and their beliefs, which is sort of this hybrid of Christianity alongside pre-Columbian mythology. And nowhere was this more evident to me then all over Bolivia, you encounter churches that have paintings of the Virgin Mary, much like in Europe, of course. Catholic churches will have this kind of iconography. But there was a particular church in El Alto which had this painting of an indigenous Mary up on the wall. And so she's wearing traditional clothing, and she looks distinctly Aymara, which is an indigenous group from that predominates in El Alto. So she looks like an Aymara Mary. And this was my first sort of introduction to the fact that in Bolivia, Christianity is being synthesized with local customs. But this was just the tip of the iceberg. This is still Catholic, but it's Andean Catholicism. But things kind of
that's interesting.
Take a turn for a little bit different, and what some would consider the occult if you just cross the street. Because if you cross the street, you enter the witches' market.
Oh,
intriguing.
So
I like where this is going.
I'm a little nervous. I would be a little shaky. First off, I'm on a cliff and I'm a fat guy. So first off, I don't trust gravity at all. But then secondly, I'm always worried. Like even when I went into tourist traps on Bourbon Street, which is about as voodoo as fucking an Apple store, I still was like, I don't know. Things could get rough.
It's interesting you mention that, because there are witches markets in La Paz that are made specifically for the tourist population. The famous Mercado de las Brujas, which is witches market, which is in La Paz proper, is really made for sort of like gap yearing students to be like, oh wow, I'll buy myself a enchanted token. But up in El Alto, it's a little differently, because up there, that's not where tourists go. And firstly, yeah, it is a cliff and it's terrifying. There are no restraints to stop you falling off the edge of it. It's just market stalls to the very edge of this cliff. It's very weird.
God.
And towards one end of this market, which is called the 17th or 16th of July market, at one end it becomes the witches market. And there's all these little tin shacks, and you walk down the street and there's all these braziers burning... Braziers? Is that the right word?
Yeah, like the incense decanter thing. Not decanter.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
We're both getting wrong, but yes, the incense burning of vessels that hang on like chains.
Exactly. Those things. I just worry that I said the word for bra, but regardless.
Well, you know what? It would be the same. A cup that holds something flaming and wonderful.
Hey.
There we go.
Am I too saucy here?
Nice.
Well, to be honest, Rob, we're all a little sauced at this hour. But yeah, they've got these like burning braziers, regardless, which are burning a thing they call God's wood, which is this very sweet-smelling wood, which is already a mysterious name, and it does smell amazing. And you walk down the street, and all the smoke is blowing over you from the God's wood, and then you've got all these little tin shacks where there are traditional Aymara women in the doors to the shacks, sort of asking you to come in. And hanging over the shacks are llama fetuses, as well as the Chicana, which is the Andean cross, which is considered by many to be sort of the most perfectly sort of, if you believe in sort of like the magic of geometry, it's the most magically geometric shape, the Andean cross, which is an image you find in a lot of Inca carving, but it predates the Inca. It goes back to the Tiwanacocha culture that came before the Inca, and then back to nameless cultures that we don't inherently know much about, except that they have this particular style of cross. And there's the Chicana cross displayed in all the doors to these little tin shacks.
Did it get conscripted? I'm sorry to interrupt you, Nick, but did it get conscripted into Roman Catholicism, or does it just happen to be this beautiful classic piece of architecture / symbolism that continues to exist even into the post-Catholic era?
It is the latter. It was not co-opted into Christianity. The fact that it is a cross is coincidental, but it has persisted through till this day in a lot of art, designs, and a lot of spiritualism in Bolivia too. It persists as this image that has not been taken over by Catholicism, which has its own specific cross. And the women who have these llama fetuses hanging, they've got all these special woods burning, and inside the little shacks, they have their own little fires where they're burning coca leaves and inhaling the fumes. These women are called witches. And they can read your fortunes. They can also curse people for a price, because in Bolivia, the idea of like occultism or witchcraft is not sort of a fringe thing for a lot of indigenous people. It is just a service. And these women, these witches, are literally just providing a service that has been required and expected by Bolivians for millennia. You would always go to the local witch and you'd get her to curse someone who has wronged you in some way, or get her to see your future, or get her to pray to the old deities to grant you good fortune. And that persists. Even in the big cities like La Paz, you still have these witches who still perform these traditional rituals. And they're only considered witches because they are performing arcane ritual that the Catholic conquistadors considered to be sacrilegious and pagan. Right. And they've kind of sort of leaned into the name, especially because it gives them a lot of tourist trade. But they're not witches. They are the spiritual people of a separate understanding of magic, mysticism, and the arcane.
All right, so that makes sense. So they're only heretical in the sense that the Catholics declared them so, because anything that might have to do more with being in tune with nature, or anything that used to be, Wiccan, or any of the, the European, herbal medicine women, or any of these essential craftspeople and doctors, for lack of a better term, in these indigenous cultures were eventually made pariah by calling them heretics and blasphemers, but not because they were necessarily doing something that was intrinsically evil in the eye of the people around them who considered them essential, but because when the Catholics move in, they're like, well, what does this have to do with Jesus? Then fuck you, you're out. So basically that.
It's because these people were providing a source of comfort and control and stability for these groups that the Catholics wanted to be embodied solely by the church. And you mentioned this actually in your recent article or recent podcast about the Lambton worm, where Lord Lambton goes to a local witch seeking guidance, because this is still the early Middle Ages, at a point where witchcraft and people who practice Anglo-Saxon and pre-Anglo-Saxon beliefs are still at large in the British countryside. So the idea of a local lord, even a Christian lord, going to a local witch, it's not so impossible at that period. There was still a lot of crossover between the pre-Christian beliefs and then the later Christian beliefs. And again, like this witch in the Lambton Worm story, much like the witches in La Paz, they're not doing anything inherently evil. They're just practicing a belief that the Christian or the Catholics ultimately want to co-opt as being their sole power.
That makes perfect sense.
She's out there making sweet armor and then just doing cool shit. Yeah, just being a cool witch. So, like I said, man, the cool chick in the woods. Like there you go.
That's what you designated her, and you're absolutely right in that.
There it is.
But what's fascinating to me now, bringing it back to what we're talking about, is that this was the Middle Ages in England. This is modern day Bolivia. And obviously, they were a little later to the game in terms of, when the Spanish came and conquered. But I find that fascinating. So they're coexisting and they're intermingling. And then the further you get away from industrialized, I don't want to say civilized because I don't feel that way at all, but urban centers, let's put it that way, the more closer you are getting to true indigenous beliefs that go back not only pre-Columbian, like you say, but perhaps longer than anyone can imagine.
Beyond collective memory in many ways. Right. You're absolutely right, because the urban centers are where the Spanish are, and the further you get away from those historical Spanish centers, the closer you get to the indigenous belief. And as I said at the start of this, in Bolivia, the indigenous people have thrived in a way that they weren't able to do in other South American countries. Therefore, their beliefs just remain untouched, which means it's this microcosm of pre-Columbian belief that just kind of progresses. And in the more built-up areas, they have synthesized their beliefs with Christianity and made these sort of like this Andean Catholicism, which sees paintings of the Aymara Mary. So this is, the Virgin Mary, but she looks like an Aymara woman. She doesn't look like the sort of pale to the point of translucent woman that we see depicted in Renaissance paintings of Europe. And as you get further and further away from the urban centers, the sort of veil of Christianity, which is pulled very thin to begin with, falls away altogether. And then you're exposed truly to like this deep, pervasive, and very powerful belief in the old gods, the Inca gods, the Tiwanacotta gods like Inti, which is the sun god, or Pachamama, who is the earth goddess, who we'll talk a lot about soon. All these gods and goddesses of the pantheon of the Inca and the pre-Inca still hold sway in a very real way that might surprise a lot of people who kind of assume that this is all history and not currently practiced or observed.
For a lot of people in the Western world, I'm not going to divide it into first through third or beyond, because I think that's asinine in a lot of ways. But a lot of people that I know, like me, and I'm always trying to explain to people, even though I don't have a ton of firsthand knowledge, though I've traveled a little bit, that everyone is not like, just because cell phones are everywhere, everyone is not homogenized, thinking the same way. Yes, everything isn't as disparate and unique, and you don't necessarily have as many untouched pockets of the world as you might have had, say, even 40 or 50 years ago. I will grant that. But there are still plenty of places on this earth that are the way they were, with beliefs that they had, with some modern technology inserted in, still function as they have for generations.
Yeah, still like totally modern. They've accepted the technology that makes their lives better, but they have not accepted the culture of the conqueror necessarily. When you get to the peripheries of Bolivia, there's no Christianity at all. I mean, there is actually still a lot of Christianity in pockets out there, but you get this deep and powerful belief in what, for them, they've never needed to change. They were never forced, because the conqueror was spread so thin on the ground. They were never forced to believe in new things. So they adopted the technology that helped them and believed in what they wanted. And that's how you get these pre-Columbian belief systems, which includes the witches, who will curse for a price and all this kind of stuff. That still continues through to this day.
One of the things that they adopted that I found fascinating, that I had no idea about, makes perfect sense to me in a a context of a conquered people, and that is El Tío, or uncle.
Yes.
And the idea that they are embracing something that their enemy fears, and a legitimate evil enemy that has come and raped their land and their people and done all sorts of horrible things. Can you tell us just a little bit about that? Because I find that an interesting subversion of what the whole missionary plan of a better armed culture is when they go into an indigenous place and they want to convert these people to their beliefs, but it can get twisted on its end. And if you could tell us a little about that, I'd appreciate it.
So there is a place in Bolivia called Potosi, and Potosi is a big
we know
mining...
about the sheep slayers of Potosi. We're well aware of what goes on in Potosi.
Potosi is where the whole El Tío story comes from, because Potosi has this mountain known as the Mountain of Silver. And I actually went to Potosi and I saw the mountain. The mountain looks sick. It's kind of caving in on itself because this one mountain has been mined for its precious metals since before the conquistadors ever arrived in South America. And it is mined up till this day. But though the Inca did mine in Potosi, it was the conquistadors who sort of industrialized the mining because, of course, they were there looking for their gold. And Potosi has a lot of very valuable minerals inside of it, the mountain, that is. And they industrialized it by enslaving the local population en masse and forcing them to work in the mines. And the indigenous people who were enslaved and forced to work in the mines are the people from that region who today are still mining the mountain, though no longer enslaved, but working in still pretty difficult conditions. And the fascinating thing that has continued from these early slaves of the Spaniards through till today is their work, and this sounds weird to say, but their worship of the devil. And there's two schools of thought on this, but before I get into the schools of thought, I'll describe my own experience. So I went there. I was working on a story, gonzo journalism and all that. And I went on a tour of the mines within this mountain, guided by local miners on their day off. And we're sort of, crawling through these like mine shafts and tunnels and pitch blackness, but for our headlamps. And we enter this little enclave where there is a larger than life size, and by life size, I mean like the size of a 6'4" man, but larger than that, a ceramic statue of the devil with big goat horns, snaggle teeth, a gigantic phallus, which he's holding in his ceramic hands. And he's got all these garlands around his neck, and in his open, absolutely, and out of his snaggle-toothed mouth, all these cigarettes are sticking. His knees are wet, which was weird, but we'll explain why in a moment. And all around his feet are coca leaves. Now, we were all chewing coca leaves at this point because the Bolivian miners chew coca leaves because it suppresses the appetite and it keeps them awake. And that way they can work awful hours in pitch blackness while they mine. And it was a similar thing that the Spaniards forced the indigenous miners to chew when they were enslaved because it makes them not get hungry and not sleep. So it's a great way to just not feed your slaves. But it is still done to this day by the miners. And what they do is whenever they go into the mine, there are statues of Satan, of the devil, throughout the mine. And every day before they go in, they sprinkle a little chaya, or a sort of a libation of 90% alcohol. My God, it was strong. Over the knees. we all have to take a sip. It was awful. It was like paint thinner. And then you splash it onto the knees of the devil. If you have cigarettes, you shove the cigarettes into his mouth and light them. And then we all have coca leaves with us. You sprinkle the coca leaves about his feet. And this is what you do before you mine every single day as a miner in Bolivia. And this has been done since the colonial period because they were enslaved. They were effectively sent into the dark to mine for precious metals. And once they were underground, there was very little chance of them ever leaving the ground again.
Oh, my God.
Oh, wow. Jesus.
It's honestly, it's horrific. And there are two schools of thought as to why Bolivian slaves and now modern miners worship the devil, who they call El Tío, which in Spanish means the uncle, because he is not perceived as a diabolical figure necessarily. He is perceived as a protector. He is like the godfather, the uncle, the man that will protect the miners. And one of the theories is that the Spaniards actually started this by sending the men into the mines and saying, you're going underground. You'll never see the light of day again. The devil is your god now. Ha, ha, ha. And then the Bolivians kind of said, okay. And that might go hand in hand with the alternative theory, which is Catholic Spanish, or Catholics and Christians in general, the one thing they fear more than everything else, especially in the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, is the devil. It's Satan. It's possession. It is the diabolical side. And Bolivians realized that their conquerors and their captors worshipped God and feared the devil, who was the other. And so Bolivians began to worship the devil because they're like, maybe the enemy of our enemy is our friend. If the Spaniards worship one deity and fear nothing but the devil, maybe the devil is the guy we want on our side to resist the conquerors.
Yeah, they picked the right side. If they're getting sent underground by these, God-fearing people, they're like, well, the fucking devil's, you always got a friend below. The devil's always there for you. So
it's the most
good on them.
Rational form of Satanism. Not to say that
really
other Satanists aren't doing their thing, do it. But
I was
that
going to
one
say,
makes.
Hey.
I'm not throwing Satanists under the bus. I know you worry about that all the time. I'm not doing that.
For me and my beliefs, thank you, Robert.
What I am saying is the people that are going to throw you into a dank, coal-filled tomb for the remainder of what could have been a long and vibrant life, the idea of embracing their adversary, literally their ultimate adversary, as your benefactor and maybe even hopefully liberator makes perfect sense. And I've never heard that before until I encountered your writing on it, Nick. I was like, oh my God, that makes such sense.
I saw it mentioned in an anthropology essay years ago that Bolivian miners to this day worship the devil because he was the great other to the god that the Catholics worshipped. But I kind of forgot until I was suddenly face to face with this giant statue of Satan. And all the miners I was with were splashing alcohol on his knees and then taking a sip and then, cha'aya al tío, which is, a toast to you, uncle. And you're sort of like, wow, like it's very real and it persists. I think both the theory that the sort of Catholics as a sick joke said, your God is Satan now, actually aligns pretty well with the locals sort of saying, well, actually, you guys are terrified of Satan, so that works for us. We're not super upset by you saying what you think is a massive insult. We're like going to take that in our stride and genuinely worship this man because he seems to scare the shit out of you, and it's fantastic.
Yeah, seriously, yeah. Wow. That's awesome.
Yeah, if you can scare an enemy, you can vanquish the enemy. Yeah. At least that might have been the mindset.
Score one for Satan. There it is.
Absolutely. To this day, there are statues of Satan in all the mines out that way. And he gets alcohol splashed in his knees and cigarettes shoved in his mouth every single day.
Not a bad gig, really.
No, I mean, I don't know how drunk I want my knees to be, generally speaking, but by and large, it makes a lot of sense. Though that shit that they're drinking makes Everclear look like a goddamn juice bomb. Like it's nothing.
And don't forget getting all gacked out on the coca leaves either, because that's just going to put you in a whole other headspace. Like I've never chewed coca leaves, but man, it just sounds like it's intense.
Yeah, I'm probably not doing myself any favors by saying I've chewed coca leaves because it is considered Class A in certain countries. But the thing is,
I was going to say you're chewing cocaine. So
the thing is, it's barely cocaine at that point. Like I'm going to go off on a tangent, but coca leaves literally suppresses your appetite and keeps you awake. But the moment you spit it out of your mouth, like the effects leave. It's not addictive or anything like that. It is just It's effectively like a tea that you chew instead of drinking. But they do have coca tea, which is actually a great way to deal with altitude sickness, which is a big problem in Bolivia.
Oh, really? Interesting. I didn't know that. Huh.
I have had candy made of coca leaves, and I can say two things. One, it was the best 3.5 days of writing without sleep I have had, and it was just candy. And I'm not fucking there. And the other thing is, I shit things I ate when I was 7 years old. I shit more than any human being should ever shit. I shit corn I had at a barbecue at the actual bicentennial. It was fucking nuts. All I did was shit and eat and fucking write. And it was and that was candy. That was fucking candy.
You know what we call shitting a lot and writing? The Bolivian journalist experience.
Yeah, there you go.
Yes. I would have
You do not have a solid stool. I was there for about a year. I didn't have a solid stool my entire time there. And proud of it.
Oh my God.
Oh, that's great.
Oh, the life, the adventurer's life.
Satan, coca leaves, and diarrhea. Yeah. That's a party.
And really,
it's a party that I want to be
that's
at.
a perfect theme for this pod, let's be honest.
Yeah, seriously. Jesus. Wow. Wow, that's hilarious.
So, everyone knows I love our old red uncle from the bowels of the earth. But what I want to jump to now, Nick, is a specific account, your first really kind of personal account that deals with something that is probably one of my personal nightmares, and that is a cursed pizzeria. Would you care to go into a little bit about your first possible encounter with the arcane in Amazonia?
Absolutely. So this was really early on in my time in Bolivia, and it happened so early that I hadn't yet sort of learned what I've already described about the very real presence of the occult and different faiths and different understandings and orderings of the world being present. This was before I kind of learned about the presence of that in Bolivia during my early days.
So you're saying you're still a man that was walking in the shoes of his own ancestors, not really expecting or knowing the depth of the occult and how it might or might not actually pertain to food you actually eat and places of business you might attend to in South America. That's what you're saying, basically.
Exactly. Like in our world, the occult, the esoteric isn't prosaic by its very nature. It is not a normal thing, but what we would consider mysticism in the occult is very prosaic for the Bolivians. And it extends to the fact that, because as I mentioned earlier, you can employ witches to curse people. And it so transpired that a pizzeria not far from the compound where I worked had been cursed by a witch at some point before.
Fuck.
I know.
That's the first thing I say. As a man who loves pizza in general, like, really? Fuck. Not to say that maybe this pizzeria and the proprietor didn't deserve said curse. I don't know what happened. All I know is when I want pizza, and if I have to even think for a second, I mean, sometimes I think it's greasy. I lost my gallbladder when I was 17. I might shit my pants anyway. That's a factor I always have to consider. But do I have to consider it's going to be of diabolical and or supernatural origin? Not usually.
Not usually. I mean, shitting your pants again is something you will do in Bolivia, whether something is cursed or not.
We do curse.
Exactly.
We do not have the gut flora. But regardless, so I went to get a pizza. I love pizza, and this place was not far from the house. And when I bought it, someone said, "Oh, you didn't buy it from there, did you?" I'm like, "Yes, I bought my pizza." I can't remember the name. I was like, "Yeah, it's a pizza." And they're like,
"Did you cringe a little? Did you be like when someone? Were you like when someone said, 'Oh, you didn't get it from there'? Were you like, 'Oh, what the? Is it like rat guts? What are they doing?' What was your thought when they said that?" Pizza.
I don't know. It's a very sort of like, it's a foodie reaction. Like, "Oh, dear, you didn't get your pizza from there, did you?" I'm like, is there a better pizza place? Like, "Well, no, that one's been cursed by a witch." And I'm like,
That's awesome.
And I was
really like.
I mean, you don't really expect that. And
is there like a Yelp review that says like awesome pizza but cursed by witch?
if only Yelp existed in Bolivia.
It's true. It's true.
So, to my knowledge, it was not the pizzeria that had been cursed, but rather the man that used to live in the house where now the pizzeria stood had been cursed by a witch. Whether he had wronged the witch himself, and again, as I said before, witches work all over La Paz. This isn't mysterious. It's very normal for there to be witches. Whether he had personally wronged a witch or if he'd wronged someone who had then recruited a witch to curse him on their behalf, I don't know. That's not really part of the story. All we know is that whoever had been cursed, the man was no longer there. He was no longer in the house. Whether he had died or vanished mysteriously or just moved, whether the curse was too much for him to bear continuing to live in La Paz, I can't say. All I can say is that in his absence, someone had opened a pizzeria in what had once been his residence. And the pizzeria was known by everyone at my company as Spooky Pizza on account of the fact that Spooky Pizza, I don't remember its actual name. I just remember it was called Spooky Pizza because it had a witch's curse on it. And even though the man who had been cursed was gone, the curse remained. And apparently weird things happened to people who ate pizzas from Spooky Pizza, is what I was told by my head editor.
So your head editor, so not an inauspicious figure in your place of employment.
No. This was the guy that he fixed us with every contact. He's the one that helped us find the stories. He proofread the things. He traveled with me to take photos. He's an excellent documentarian, and he straight up told me, weird things happen to people who eat at Spooky Pizza. You shouldn't have bought your pizza there, and then refused to have any of my pizza.
Sage. But I have to admit, I might go into this with a 50-50 because I mentioned earlier how I feel about Curse in general. I don't usually take a fucking chance, but on the other hand, if they say weird things happen, I might be like, well,
curious.
Kind of weird. Maybe it'd be cool.
Good,
but you
weird?
had the balls to actually dive in and fucking eat a slice, right?
Well, exactly. And I wasn't remotely concerned about the possibilities of the pizza being cursed because who's ever heard of a cursed pizza? And this is before I actually encountered the witches and the witches market. So the idea of witches in La Paz was already that wasn't yet part of my consciousness. I'm like, this is ridiculous. It's a weird thing for you to say that there's a cursed pizza. I don't know why you said it. I'm going to eat my pizza and I'm going to share it with my good friend KK. His name was KK. It's spelled in a weird way. That's by the by. So KK and I shared a pizza, and I mentioned KK because he and I both had a really weird night. So it's not just me saying this.
This is where it gets really interesting, by the way. Reading your account, I was like, the living fuck. But please continue.
I'm actually going to look up my account now, and I'm going to look into it. I can already edit this out. So I'm going to read the account as I wrote it because, it is pretty weird. So here we are. The rest of the night, this is after I shared my pizza with KK, was so bizarre that it has led many people, when I've recounted this episode to them, to speculate that the chefs at Spooky Pizza had laced my pizza with narcotics. This I decry because no one would waste perfectly good drugs spiking a stranger's pizza.
Or it's the best pizzeria ever.
It's only in 90s television special episodes that drug dealers give drugs to kids.
We're going to give Nikolaus a little methamphetamine and
we're just going to give you some drugs
pepperoni
free.
Randomly dosing a stranger is totally an after-school special.
It's a waste of good drugs.
To waste the money, to waste the resources.
Exactly.
And plus, if you're running this fucking business, unless you somehow just got fired under nefarious shady circumstances, and you're like, fuck this dude, I'm going to ruin this pizzeria's reputation. But that's still so far out of left field. It is completely illogical that somebody would dose a pizza. Can't be totally taken off the table, but I agree.
But everyone I've described this to has told me, they must have dosed the pizza. I'm like, that makes no sense. But so the effects my colleague, KK, and I suffered, and we both had this, we sort of experienced slowed down time. Entire hours were now missing from our memory. We'd lie in bed, and suddenly it would be 3 hours later, but we hadn't slept, and we had hallucinations, including melting walls within our apartment. And I remember at one point I was staggering to the bathroom because I was also undergoing a rather graphic full body purge at this point.
Boy.
As I walked past into the bathroom, I remember looking into the door of the lounge and saying, "Hey KK, how you doing?" He looked at me with these wide eyes. He said, "I'm having the weirdest night, Nick."
Cursed pizza, dude.
And when I finally staggered into bed, we were surrounded, he and I, by these masked entities that were traditional dress, but wearing Diablada masks, which is devil masks, which is very common in Bolivian folkloric dance, who sort of surrounded the bed. And it was either very weird food poisoning, but I've never had food poisoning that's made me hallucinate before, or potentially the side effects of a witch's curse. And while this sounds rather innocuous, there's numerous things it could have been other than it being a curse. What I found most interesting about the whole experience when the next day I woke up from sleep paralytic nightmares and surrounded by masked entities and melting walls, as I mentioned, and just a general weirdness to the night, which I can get into if you want to ask questions. But the next day I described this to people, and no one for a moment put it down to food poisoning or drugs. It's only people outside of Bolivia who said the pizza was laced. People in Bolivia said, well, yeah, what did you expect? A witch cursed the pizzeria.
Like, well, yeah, dude, you ate spooky pizza, therefore the spooky folks show up and you get diarrhea out of every hole.
It's like, what did you expect from spooky pizza? And like, it's
the best.
In and of itself, it's a rather innocuous story, but I mean, as we'll get to shortly, there are obviously far greater and more shocking stories out there that relate to Bolivian occultism and arcana. But it was my first experience with the prosaic nature of mysticism in Bolivia, where witches
I wouldn't
part
necessarily. Absolutely right, and I wouldn't call it innocuous. I would say this could have been positively traumatizing if you weren't in the right headspace to fucking deal with it. Because whatever it may be, I guess the first thing I want to ask you, Nick, is there, based on any of the indigenous peoples you talk to, significance to women dressed in this classic indigenous dress, wearing these diabolical masks? I mean, did you probe around and try to figure out what that symbolism? I mean, I know you said it's a pretty common thing in the dances and forms of worship, but did you figure out like what this might mean in the context of a curse?
So the interesting thing is that the dress of the people who surrounded my bed in sleep paralytic stupor, dancing in their masks, aside from their masks, they wore the clothing of the cholita, which is a term used for Aymara women, traditional Aymara women who wear a specific type of clothing. And if you look it up online, it's a very distinctive style of dress in Bolivia. The women wear bowler hats. They have Awayu blankets, which they sort of use as shawls, which are these vibrantly covered shawls, which they drape over themselves, and a very sort of 18th century style of like jerkin and big billowy skirt.
I've definitely seen that.
Oh,
is
yeah.
that is that similar in dress at all to what the Quechua women wear, or am I just conflating?
You're not entirely wrong. The Quechua women of Peru have a very similar dress sense, but in Peru there is a lot more color to it, and it has more Inca style in its dress, whereas the Cholitas of Bolivia have a lot more sort of European, but of sort of, they always have, it's the dress sense of the Europeans of the 1900s, but with a lot of like masculine aspects, such as the bowler hat, which is not traditionally a hat worn by a woman. And this is the Aymara dress, which is worn by very traditional Cholitas. And it is important to note that all witches that I encountered in La Paz all dress in this fashion because they are of the traditional Aymara sect.
Oh, that is notable. That is definitely worthy of note.
So the women dancing about my bed, who I would later, because this is before I'd encountered any witches in La Paz, I would later encounter women who wore the same style of dress who were indeed witches. It's not to say only witches wear this style of dress. It is pervasive among traditional Aymara women, but witches do wear it. And then the masks that they were wearing were the Diablada mask, which is the mask of the devil worn at Carnival. And as we've established earlier, the devil is a different figure for Bolivians than it would be for individuals of other countries.
Right. So do you think that, it's weird enough that it was just a curse on a dude that lived there, and then apparently there's some sort of occult fallout, that a residue that remains that contaminates anything that's in there thereafter. I guess that's the only explanation I can come up with it. But do you think that this was like a visitation meant to just haunt, to disturb, maybe even to communicate something? I mean, here's a bigger question. I guess it's just weird, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but could some of these curses, depending on who the source is, if it hits the person that it was intended for, it be completely detrimental? But if it hits somebody else, it's not necessarily collateral damage. It's trying to steer you away, say, from a particularly nefarious place without doing any intrinsic damage.
Yeah. Well, let me say it did steer me away from spooky pizza for the rest of my time in Bolivia. And I think it's interesting. I mean, obviously, we wouldn't know the first thing about curses. It's entirely speculative because curses are something we cannot yet explain. But a curse is targeted by a witch at a man. That man vanishes for whatever reason, but the curse lingers. But by the time that it is infecting, because again, if we talk about like hauntings, like ghosts haunt things, specific objects and things, and it's possible to sort of say that something made in this house is a sort of afflicted by an element, haunted by an element of the curse. But by the time that the man that was targeted is gone, and now bits of this curse are getting into the pizza, say, I mean, it's a very diluted curse by that point, because this curse was made before it was a pizzeria, and the curse was never specifically meant to target people who bought pizzas there. So I think you're onto something in that sort of the curse, whatever happened to that man, I mean, the story goes that the curse was so awful it made him leave. Whether he died or not, that depends on who you talk to, but he vanished following this cursing.
Right.
So obviously it was detrimental to him. But then people who buy the pizza almost just picking up on the fallout of the, I mean, there's a weird analogy, but the nuclear bomb that was the curse on this man's life has radioactive fallout that has infected the pizza. And much like Chernobyl, the ground that was cursed remains with a low-level cursive radiation that now infects things that come into contact with it, such as pizza.
Man, it's like, yeah, it's like the curse residue. Like, I wonder if you get like a soda, if you're like, I'm just here to get a drink if something happens, or if like, God forbid you get a calzone. Holy shit! Like,
exactly.
What are you gonna get? Like a fucking
goblins.
Dude, like a creepy calzone, and you're like being held down by all various sorts of demons and shit, or like a sweet satanic sub or something.
Well, that's the thing.
It's interesting though that
Sweet satanic sub.
Yeah,
The best. It's got to have hot peppers galore and maybe
yeah, dude, like roasted red peppers and shit, some provolone,
like a spicy wasabi mustard.
It's kind of interesting though that like whatever sort of energy that this is dealing with, that it's so pervasive that, like you said, it's kind of like a fallout, but that it actually goes into the ingredients of the fucking pizza.
Well,
like
that's
the oven is cursed.
I was
going
to say, the way I've always thought about it, I've always had a hard time with it. Again, I'm not going to try to go down this path continually, but I'm going to say it again. Again, I don't technically see how curses are possible, but then I can see how truly directed hate and as Nick put it so succinctly, higher science, an ability to manipulate the world around us in ways that we have not been able to measure scientifically by our current standards. I can believe in the possibility of that, but it always occurred to me that it might be something like radiation, like Nick was saying with Chernobyl, whatever, in that like a curse might have a half-life, or like a haunting, even for that matter. Like, how long does it last? How severe is it? And is it, and again, here's the other part of the science of curses, for lack of a better term that I don't understand. Is it really directed? It's directed initially by intention, but after that fact, is it just something you can be exposed to, like toxins, like pollutants, like radiation, and then have some detrimental effects that lessen over time? Or does it really have, is it so concentrated with intent that if you aren't somebody that is either related to the actual individual that was cursed, or somehow doing something similar to the accursed, like some other shady dealings or whatever, are you maybe given a pass? And I'm not an expert on curse lore at all. It both frightens me and frustrates me because it's so difficult to ascertain what there could be to it, except for one fact that obviously the act of believing in a curse can lead to death. That's been proven time and time again. And so obviously that element's strong. But if there can be something sort of like spoken spells to just the physical manipulation of sound, changing the intrinsic nature of reality, it could go all the way from string theory to straight bullshit. Yeah.
If you're talking,
there's something deeper going on.
Or even if you take like the Crowley route with like sex magic. I mean, if you're focusing your will onto the universe, and that just happens to be the ways and means that you're doing it. Right. I mean, is it necessarily like shooting a bullet into a wall? does it go through? Does it splinter off? What does it do? You know, I mean, I guess it depends on the witch or the magician performing the ceremony and or the curse. That's obviously me being speculative here with creepy calzones.
We have to be creepy calzones and spooky pizza. Mark Store's new pizzeria.
There you go. Yeah, come on in for a satanic
and not
sub.
to put you on a spot, Nick, because Christ knows this is probably not something you ever overthought. I mean, do you have any just wild speculations, admittedly from the cuff, with not saying this is your core belief or anything like that, as to, as esoteric as all this is, as to how these things might manifest and how they might affect people after the fact, as you are one of the very few people who I actually know personally that may have, big emphasis on the may, been affected by a fucking curse.
Yeah.
So it's actually so interesting what you said before, because in a way, the spooky pizza story is kind of a scientific test of the plausibility of cursing, in the fact that this man is hit by a curse. He leaves because of the curse, but there is a diluted residue present from the curse that is latently affecting things in the area in a very similar way to how radiation works.
Right.
And it's very interesting when I think about it like that, because I've never thought about it like that until you mentioned it just then. But it does add a sort of scientific rationale that cursing is not something we can possibly explain with our current understanding of science. But then again, I mean, we couldn't explain genetics 100 years ago. So, I mean, things that we take for granted now are so difficult to explain even a century ago. And I'm sure at some point in the future, if cursing is scientifically based, which if it's real, it will be, we'll be able to find the way to explain it. But it does seem to be this kind of thing that possibly, if you can in some way, maybe knowingly or unknowingly, harness the ability to administer a curse. The curse is not just emotional magic, although it might be channeled in some way by it. It is somehow physical matter in the universe. And if it is going to hit someone and curse them, then it makes sense if it's a physically directed thing, much as you see like shooting a bullet, like if it ricochets or if like a bomb goes off and there's a fallout, like that lessened or shrapnel, even lessened particles of that initial, say, like curse beam will remain in the area and continue to pass on whatever we consider to call a curse for many years afterwards. Because the pizzeria, again, like it's important to stress, the pizzeria was not cursed. The man that used to live there was cursed, but latent effects of the curse remained after his departure that in smaller and smaller doses affect the people who buy pizzas and consume food that was prepared on the site. So it almost implies there is a physicality to the curse that is, though reduced, residual and lingering in the atmosphere and the air of that house.
I'll tell you what, this is what I like about talking to you, Nick. I can piss some shit out there and you make it sound so legit. you take my fucking unwinding spool of bullshit and then you just put a patina on it. God bless you. That maybe gave it some merit. But I do think there's something to it. Because the moment I want to roll my eyes at that, as I often do about any number of things, I think to myself, the most learned man in a big metropolitan center, in the dark ages, rolled his eyes when someone tried to tell him a tiny invisible living thing was somehow getting into your open orifices and creating illness. It sounds absurd. Right. You might as well say a tiny gremlin's going in and fucking you up. Yeah,
right. Exactly. Yeah. Bad air is the problem, because bacteria is impossible, because microscopic animalcules just couldn't possibly exist. And now we take it for granted. And even the most sort of like closed-minded person doesn't disagree with belief in bacteria. You're absolutely right. I mean, science has a way of eventually explaining things that earlier on, because they were impossible to see or impossible to feel the effects of, were considered and decried as impossible. I'm not saying that's the case with spooky pizza, but hey.
No, none of us
I don't know, man. I think curses might be confirmed. I mean, I think we've already confirmed it, honestly.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I go that far. But
well, so I guess the one thing I got to ask real quick here, and it's a total fucking digression here, is Nick, after you ate the spooky pizza and you tripped balls, basically, how nervous were you to eat pizza again? Like any pizza ever?
So if this was in a country that wasn't Bolivia, I think I'd have been more nervous, because in Bolivia, you're nervous to eat any food.
Right.
And there were times when I got gastric infections that could have killed me had I not dragged myself to the hospital from eating an apple I bought in a market. So in Bolivia, I was nervous to eat everything. And so
like when you got back home, where you're like, boy, sure could go for a pizza, and then kind of take a pause and you're like, wait a minute.
Yeah. I got a 100-mile stare.
just staring at a sweet pie. You're like, pizza. I see you over there, pepperoni. I see
someone makes me a calzone.
TSD.
I say,
yeah, really, yeah, seriously, I would be nervous. Jesus.
I was nervous. Well, there's a good reason. I never ate at Spooky Pizza again after that, and I was very hesitant about. You can't.
You can't go back for seconds. I mean, scientifically,
one witch's dance is all one needs, on top of an extreme purging, which is the most genteel way of putting.
I mean, then again, if you wanted to scientifically speaking, you could be like, all right. Could have been bad pizza. Could have been a curse. Go back the second time, see what happens. But
yeah,
that sounds good, except for exactly. Except that the fallout from the second one might be even worse. I mean, Jesus, that's like.
It's honestly,
I mean, you're a braver man than I am. So.
The thing is, I've had food poisoning before, but this was different to any food poisoning. And food poisoning is vomiting and feeling poorly. Food poisoning Food poisoning isn't walking through the house feeling like you're levitating. Food poisoning isn't the walls melting. Food poisoning isn't you staring at your friend for what you realize has been 2 hours, but it felt like 10 minutes. But you look at your clocks, like it was as if we were high. Yet that isn't possible unless they lace the pizza with drugs, which just makes no sense. And considering there was already a precedent for the fact that weird things happen to people that eat at Spooky Pizza. And then, of course, we're all haunted by terrifying visions of masked witches at a time when I didn't yet know that is what Bolivian witches even looked like. I mean, there's a lot of weird stuff in there.
The most fascinating part to me.
That's the part that really gets me. And now your friend experienced this too, right?
Yes, he did.
So you guys both experienced, and I mean, shared hallucinations like that are from, drugs. I mean, obviously DMT aside, people claim that, but who really knows? But that's not really a common thing at all.
That's not how we're both tripping balls works. I mean, even melting and everything else is how it works. But shared mass tripping is not how that works.
No. Where it's almost like, holy shit, Nikolaus, are you seeing that? And he's like, oh shit, I am. And like you're both seeing it. Like, yeah, that's fucking crazy. Holy shit. All right, well, shit, there it is, man.
So that was a fucking phenomenal encapsulation on a broader spectrum and on a very personal level of Andean Arcana and the synthesis of Roman Catholicism with the indigenous pre-Columbian beliefs and a lot of the things that went on. And this is how we're going to end part one. You listeners out there, you're super lucky. You are going to get a part two where we start dipping our toes into the piranha and occult-infested waters of Amazonian Arcana.
Nice.
And it's
things are about to get real
awesome.
Spooky.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Forget pizza. We're getting way scarier.
Yeah. No, you're right. It's not dosed pizza and random curse fallout. It's an altogether new level of fuck-uppery.
Awesome. Yeah, so definitely everybody, thank you all so very much for your contributions. Be sure to come back next week for part 2 with Nikolaus. We don't normally push the Instas, the Twitters, and the Facebooks, but there will be links to Nikolaus's Instas, Twitters, and Facebooks, so be sure to check him out there.
Like him, follow him. Obviously, he's an awesome motherfucker. Totally.
So check that out, and stop back next week for part 2. And Nikolaus, thank you so very much. We'll be talking with you soon.
Talk to you soon.
Thanks.
Creepy calzones and satanic subs.
I knew it.
I'm going to trademark.
That is the title of the episode. Creepy calzones and satanic subs. That is the episode title right there.
That's a great title. I love
it. Awesome. Oh, man. All right, we'll talk to you soon.
Uncle Tio!
Woo!